put your hands together as we invite architect Ricardo Mateu, UHA, London.
So I'm the second Ricardo of the day. We're like London buses. Can never find one when you want one, and then we come two at a time. My firm, UHA, is based in London, but we're a very international studio, and we work on projects from Mexico City to Mumbai, and we're doing a lot of work here in India also. I want to explain a little bit about where we're from, how we work, our processes, and then go through a number of case studies to explain how we propose to innovate through design, through structural innovation, through sustainability, and how our architecture can be transformative. So it sounds like a cliche, but we're very much a 24-hour studio. We have a team from Japan, from Tokyo in Japan over to Mexico City, so we can actually work 24 hours. It's a very young team. Our studio in Mumbai, the average age must be about 25 to 30. It's an all-Indian crew here in India, and we're doing some amazing buildings in Gurgaon and Delhi, Mumbai and Pune. So we were established in London in 2011. Before that, I used to work for a fairly well-known architect called Norman Foster. And the Mumbai office was founded quite early on in 2013. So we have these separate studios that work as one collective. Now, how do you work efficiently in all of these places? And I've underlined the word efficient because it takes some logistics to make all of that happen. So, as I mentioned, I'm not quite sure why we're going from west to east, since the day starts in the east, but we have a series of satellite offices, our headquarters in London. We have one guy in Japan, and all of our offices, our satellite offices, are set up and run by guys who've worked in the studio in London for us for a number of years and then go back home. I've lost count of how many nationalities we actually have in the studio, but we are genuinely working in 6 time zones to produce projects in all of these places. So we have the headquarters in London. We have a new office just opened in Lisbon, in Portugal, and they've already picked up a new project over there. We have a new visualization arm set up in Budapest, in Hungary. Quite an established office now in Cyprus, where we have a lot of work, and our first satellite office, which was Mumbai. So the 24-hour studio, does it really work? Well, yeah, I think the downside is I have to stay awake for 24 hours to talk to everybody, but we can start in the early morning, briefing Japan, and then they will go to bed and get up the next day and do a day's work while we're asleep in London, and so on. So we've got Japan, Mumbai, catching up, GMT minus 4.5 hours. Then Europe, the European offices, which are 2 hours or 1 hour behind us. Then London, Lisbon's the same time zone as us. And then Mexico City, which is obviously 6 hours behind. So we have a genuine 24-hour work cycle. And this allows us to meet our clients' demands. I mean, I'm sure all of the architects in the room know that every client wants their project yesterday, generally. And while we can't quite achieve time travel, we can do things in record time to give them the results they want. So how do we do this? Obviously, we have a great pool of talent from across the world, and although the politics of the UK don't seem to be on a very even keel at the moment, we still have a huge pool of talent there that comes to London from across the world. Less Europeans these days, unfortunately, but many Indians, many people from the Far East as well. And we have a great ability to attract these people by doing exciting projects in all of the places we work in. We'll try and use the most modern softwares available. We're heavily into BIM. We work very closely with Graphisoft and have developed some really interesting plugins between the parametric modeling side of things and BIM, and generally move into BIM at a very early stage in the process. We also have structural engineers in-house in London, so we're trying to innovate and bring structural engineering innovations from quite an early stage in the project. It's always a battle to convince clients that we need all the consultants from the beginning, but I think when they see the work that we can produce by working in harmony from an early stage, they can appreciate the results. This is an image of the Mumbai office over on the right-hand side. It looks like it's inhabited by desk lamps more than people, but there's a great team there in Mumbai, one of our best, actually. So the process, the design process. We start with a brief, obviously. Sometimes it's a very detailed brief. Sometimes it's nothing. It's practically non-existent. So there may be some period where we have to investigate that brief. Obviously, there are other more organized clients who have a very clear idea of what they want. And so we probably tend to overproduce in the material that we are providing them with at a concept level or even a pre-concept level. And we will always start in 3D and be modeling from the get-go, really. The kids that come out of school these days, they generally don't draw anything with a pencil anymore. I'm probably the last dinosaur left in the office with a pencil. And so they really get the process going with the 3D work that they do from an initial stage. As we develop the concept, really by the end of concept, we've effectively got schematic design. And it's really only a question then of coordinating it with those other disciplines. Obviously, if we've had those other disciplines on board from the beginning, then we're one step ahead. And we generally develop the design from scheme design onwards in BIM, and we are an exclusively BIM office, really, in all projects that develop beyond schematic design. As I said, we work very closely with Graphisoft, and we've just set up a new team in Budapest, our visualization team, to collaborate more closely with them and see what innovations we can bring. We've done projects all the way through to GFCs in BIM, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And, well, you can see some of the results. Okay, so I want to go through a series of case studies to explain a little bit about some of our different working methods. I asked our communications guys to give me a good spread of projects across the world. They managed to pick 2 that are in Cyprus, which is a bit of a shame, but never mind. At least we've got one in India. So we'll start with Sky Tower, which is a residential block set in these very luxurious grounds in Cyprus. We have a 10-strong team in Cyprus that are architects, landscape architects, and project managers, and we are project managing some of our own projects there. So this project is very embedded in the landscape, let's say. We wanted to do something that emerged from the landscape, but also trying to express the verticality of what is not an especially tall tower. There's a lot of competition in Cyprus right now with a huge amount of Russian investment on the island, and there are several towers going up. We are building 3 of them right now. So you need to stand out from the crowd. And we decided on this very kind of slender form with these very simple ribbons. And the idea was to try and pare this design down to as simple an equation as possible. This is the site, obviously. We're not quite on the seafront, but some way back, visible from the highway behind and the seafront. So our process, the client had a previous planning agreement for 2 towers on the site, but being a great patron of architecture and having a great deal of good taste, he said to us, well, can you do something with a single block? So we looked at combining 2 blocks together, in effect, to try and create something more consolidated. At the same time, we wanted to express the verticality. So obviously we put grooves into this block, we shaped the block, and we embedded it into the landscape so that it felt like part of its context. Now, from a software and a development point of view, we pared this down to a very simple exercise of tweaking the ribbons, really, in a parametric model that then links directly to the BIM model. And this enabled us to do real-time changes to the geometry of the building to eventually get to what we have, what you see in front of you here. This is a very early image of the BIM model on the right. And this is the building as it is today. Well, the one on the right-hand side is the building today. This photo was taken just a couple of weeks ago. We've still got some way to go, but they're building incredibly fast. You can already start to see the raking columns in the image on the left-hand side. And we hope to be topped out early in the new year, working at a cycle rate of a floor a week. This is the second project in Cyprus that I wanted to show you, really as an example of structural innovation. And it's again a high-end residence set in some luxurious grounds, but it has something rather unique about it, which is that it leans by 20 degrees. And to put that into perspective, the Leaning Tower of Pisa is somewhere between 5 and 10 degrees, depending on what article you read. This is 20 degrees. It's quite a significant incline and quite an interesting structural problem for our engineers. Now, our client doesn't like to be a guinea pig. He said, why do I have to? First of all, we convinced him to do post-tension slabs, the first private developer to do post-tension slabs on the island. And then when we came up with this crazy idea of a 20-degree incline, he nearly had a heart attack. But what this gives him is these amazing balconies at the front that are effectively free of FSI. There's the location. The thinking behind the project is really to, I guess the inspiration, if you like, was the super yacht. The marina is just in front of the project, and we wanted to capture some of that spirit, some of those big, wide, open spaces. And so we used the BIM program and some quantitative analysis to calculate that the increase in structural cost was around 5% by putting in the incline. We did various studies, no degrees, 10 degrees, 20 degrees. But actually the gain that the client gets in terms of sales from these huge verandas, these huge balconies to the sea is much greater than that, which helped to convince him. So you really have to use the technology to fight your battles for you and provide the arguments that can convince the clients to do these somewhat crazy things. And this is a quick video of some of the design process, working in Twin Motion, which is a visualization program that ties in very nicely with our BIM program with ArchiCAD. And we can draw elements very quickly, we can attach materials to them very quickly, we can render them in an incredibly short space of time, and really do many, many different iterations of the design in a short period of time. These studies are really in-house studies for us to look at and decide what we want to present to the client. So it's a very quick exercise. You can even throw in some hedges, some greenery around the side, and this is the kind of render that you can achieve with this very quick process. And the final result, well, this is on site at the moment, we hope will be a very elegant expression of those early ideas. I'm quite convinced that no one else, no other developer, certainly in Cyprus, will attempt building such a structure. And this is our project in Delhi. So working with local architects, GPM, and Unity Group, who are the developer, we designed this tower to form the centerpiece of the Amaryllis development, which is quite a dense residential development in the heart of Delhi, in Karol Bagh. It is currently on site. It will be over 200 meters in height, the tallest building in Delhi. And we really wanted to capture something of the essence of Versace in this building. We've gone on to redesign all of the surrounding blocks as well, although I'm not actually able to show you that at the moment because it's still under development. These are the views from the top of the tower. Obviously, we're hoping for some cleaner air and not too much smog in the future so we can appreciate those views. And as I mentioned, the master plan is quite a dense development, developer-led development, with a relatively large area of landscape in the center, and we've tried to make the most of that. When working in Gurgaon and in Delhi, where the terrain is largely flat, we always like to try and create something of a landscape, some undulations in the landscape to create a bit more interest so that you're not just looking at another block of apartments. So we've really tried to work very carefully and closely with our clients and with our landscape architects to create this landscape of hills and mounds and grottos and caves to kind of complement the architecture and give it a very sort of high-end resort feel. So taking as our inspiration the kind of haute couture of Versace, we looked at some of those spectacular designs from the great man himself and tried to kind of reinterpret that in our architecture in a sensible way, in a more subtle way perhaps, again accentuating the verticality of the tower. We have these kind of shoulder pads at the top of the building, if you like, where the amenity spaces happen, and this shows you a little bit about how the geometry was developed and worked through to produce the design. It's quite a complex building. It has many different types of floor plate. We are currently up to GFCs to the high-rise of the building and pushing hard with our cladding design. There are a number of complex elements on the building, such as the entrance canopy, which is a very complex piece of geometry that we're at the moment trying to rationalize and make sense of. And this is really a quick exercise in evaluating a solar impact perspective, doing a solar study and then looking at the depth of the fins and the number of fins, and kind of inputting that data in one software and then having it live linked to the building model to give us the result, the optimum result that we need. It's clearly not going to be the cheapest building to build in Delhi, but we are doing our utmost to rationalize this rather complex geometry. And here it is on site. They have completed the raft foundation now, so we are going to start moving ahead quite quickly now, and you'll start to see the building coming out of the ground in the new year. This is some imagery from the site. These are the surrounding blocks, which are obviously at a much more advanced state. They're up to level 26 or so now. And the overall master plan, all of the 15 towers on site, except the Icon Tower, will be linked by a sky bridge at level 26, which is going to end up being a kilometer in length. And this is the money shot, if you like, at the top of the building where the amenity spaces are. You can see those vertical louvers become the shoulder pads that I was talking about before, to try and create a crown, if you like, to the top of the building to really celebrate this exciting new piece of architecture. This is the final project I'd like to show you, which is on a much more different scale, an urban scale. It was a competition that we won in Moscow, in Russia, which my esteemed colleague, the other Ricardo, was on the jury for. He actually voted for another team, I'm fairly sure, but we managed to win out in the end with the client. And it was a very interesting project in that it was a huge site, obviously, 58 hectares in size, roughly a triangular site, and it housed a disused steelworks. The name of the project, or the name of the site, was Serpent Moloch, which means hammer and sickle, so the symbol of Russia, if you like. It was a heavily polluted industrial site, and we took the decision fairly early on to get rid of most of the buildings there. So in kind of contrast to my colleague's presentation this morning, we looked at a very different approach here, and apart from this little building here, it's this little building here, everything else was new. We originally proposed 3 buildings to be retained for heritage value and adaptive reuse. Client said, So we ended up with just the one, which is a museum really to the former steelworks that were on the site. So we went on to design the do the architectural design. Here you see some of the existing buildings. They were of pretty low quality, to be honest, and didn't really have much potential for adaptive reuse. But what we set about doing, together with our partners, LDA, who are responsible for the landscape design, what we set about doing was trying to create a new neighborhood in the city. Remember, this is 1.8 million square meters of development. It'll take some time to build, but really what we wanted to do was not only create a mixed-use master plan, but really give an identity to these different neighborhoods. There's a business center, media center at the heart of the site. Retail at one end, there's a metro station here and another metro station here. and then create these new neighborhoods of low to mid to high rise across the site to create a variety of architecture, all within the constraints of this site. There are very strict height guidelines here because we're 2 miles from the Kremlin. So the Kremlin is just here. And it was quite a long process. We went through a very detailed analysis at a master plan level, looking at the palettes to use and give each neighborhood its own identity. Obviously the winters in Moscow are pretty fierce, and every client you ever talk to in Russia is all about how's this going to work in the 6 months of the year when it's sub-zero, and I mean seriously sub-zero. I've been there a number of times in December, January when it's minus 30 and the work still goes on. So this is one of the residential blocks that we designed in some details, another one. And on a smaller scale, let's say, we adopted those ideas of green roof and green park. The whole project is really centered around a green park, which was initially much bigger in the competition design, but obviously got squeezed by our developer client to get maximum return. This is it on site over a year ago now, at a fairly advanced stage, and I'm going to finish on a small video of the project as well. But there's a variety of palettes, as I said. There's some very clean looking buildings. It's unashamedly contemporary, and if you know Moscow, it's really there's a lot of buildings there, a lot of modern buildings there that look like old buildings. So this was a bit of a shot in the arm for Moscow. At the same time, they're very keen on solid building materials. Aluminium cladding was a little bit sketchy for them for residential, so we did include some brickwork as well. Here you see some images of the park, which has come out really nicely. And there's lots of facilities and amenities there. And I'll finish on this video. So this project is really about a transformative architecture. And of course, none of this would be possible without our fantastic clients. I haven't shown you many of the Indian projects, but we have a fantastic group of clients here in Mumbai as well that we're very grateful to. One of our earliest repeat clients is M3M, who we've been working with since the very beginning. In fact, they were our first client in India, and we're now working with many of the big names here. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, sure.
Well, we'll have the floor open for 2 questions, so we have time for 2 questions. I've got my colleagues with the mics around. So anyone who has any question for Architect Ricardo?
hopefully not.
Yes, could we have a show of hands? Yes, please. Could you have the mic?
The question that I have is, you had mentioned that it was not a good idea to do GS, good for construction drawings from BIM. Why is that?
Well, I think, let's just say, I'm sure it's possible, but I think the team that we had in place went a little overboard and decided to detail everything in 3D, which is obviously a bit crazy, you know, including the installation. So while it's perfectly possible, we've found that still a lot of contractors have not adopted BIM. So there's not necessarily an advantage, let's say, when the project goes out to tender or goes to site to generate everything in BIM. Now, obviously, by the time we've finished with DD, we've got a very detailed set of drawings, and we can extract all of the details that we need from there and then further generate them in 2D, which is our new plan or our current plan of work. But I'm still open to the idea of exploring, you know, continuing the BIM through and doing as-built drawings as well. So I'm just really talking from a personal experience in our studio of one example, which was the Sky Tower that I showed you earlier, where the model got very heavy and difficult to operate. But probably because we took it too far, in a sense. I'm sure if you thought about it and structured it in the right way, it would be eminently possible.
Hi.
Hi there.
So that problem is there, that the model becomes too heavy, but what about from keeping all the engineering information in one location for the future users, facilities management, or just going back and figuring out where what is? So isn't that something that we need to start thinking about, or is that something you think about while doing the models, like 20 years down the road if the client needs to look at the building? Would it be better to have a complete BIM model or a BIM model with fragmented GFCs?
Look, I think BIM is the way forward. There's no doubt about it, and that's why we've adopted it on every project now in the office that goes beyond scheme design. We haven't yet had the opportunity to see how it really works in those latter stages, you know, the building management stages. We always use that as part of the discussion at the beginning of any discussion with a client, to convince them of the benefits of BIM. But as I said, contractors and developers are still a little bit behind the curve in that sense. Well, not all of them, obviously, but quite a few of them have not yet taken that step to adopt it 100%, let's say. But yes, obviously I see the advantages there, and we would like to maximize that potential.